in and out. That's the hope that the French had when they sent troops to Mali back in January. Wednesday evening, the French president promised that all of Mali's territorial sovereignty would be restored, quote, within days. Paris hoping for a quick handover to African and UN forces and the start of a drawdown by the end of next month. But just hours after the French president spoke, a first suicide attack in the northern city of Timbuktu. The jihadists' last hurrah or the beginning of another lingering low-level insurgency? It's not just, though, about maintaining a military presence. How do you get a functioning Malian state back up and running? France 24's Luc Brown is just back from the northern city of Gao, where more than 2 months on, there is still a power vacuum. We'll see an excerpt from the story he filmed for Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Also with us, Gao native Abdoulay MAIGA. Welcome to the France 24 debate. Welcome as well to American journalist and filmmaker Michael KIRTLEY. And also joining us, Franco-Congolese blogger Jean-Hugues KABUIKU. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag F24Debate. Let's begin with the latest on Timbuktu. Correspondent Nicolas Frébeau reports fighting was over this Thursday. The city secure. The Malian army speaks of 6 jihadists killed. One Mali army soldier killed by the suicide bomber. Another because of wrong GPS coordinates given to the French. We have more on this story from Kedevan Gorgestani.
For the first time, Timbuktu was the target of a suicide attack. On Wednesday night, a car exploded at a checkpoint near the city's airport, killing at least 1 Malian soldier and wounding several others. The blast was followed by clashes between armed militants and Malian soldiers. Just hours before the attack, French President François Hollande announced Mali's sovereignty would be restored over most of its territory within a few days.
Our intervention has produced significant results in 2 months. The offensive by terrorist groups has been stopped, and towns have been recaptured.
Unlike the northern towns of Gao and Kidal, Timbuktu had so far remained free of such attacks. The violence has increased concerns that Islamist militants will just regroup once the French troops leave. France's military is set to hand over security operations to African forces by the end of April. France also announced this Thursday that its ambassador to Mali, Christian Rouillet, would be replaced by Gilles Huberzon, France's current special envoy to Mali.
Michael KIRTLEY, what's your reaction when you heard that news out of Timbuktu?
I think that, as you say, is it a last hurrah or is it the beginning of a resistance of some kind? My personal feeling is it's very hard to know, but what we know for sure is that the leaders of these different movements of Mujao and ACMI have pulled back and are in hiding. The Mujao, the rumor is that Mujao leaders have even gone into neighboring countries of Niger and Burkina Faso, whereas the ACMI leaders is a little less clear as to where they might be. What I feel, however, is probably these attacks that are taking place in Timbuktu and in Gao, including the recent attack on the administrative buildings there, is more of an act of despair at this particular point than an act that's actually being commanded as an ongoing routine. I think that particular approach to attacking will be reinforced by what's going on right now. And you've got these young. Let's keep in mind that Gao itself, and to a lesser extent Timbuktu, are rife with collaborators that collaborated with the Mujao over time. And so these people are being rejected by a lot of the population that live there. And so a lot of the young people there don't know exactly what to do, and they've gone into local villages that are nearby. So, and I hope to see in the report where we're going to find out about this even more.
Abdoulay MAIGA, what is your family telling you about that, about those people that have vanished, who were in control of your native city?
Basically, I think that the people that are living currently in Gao, they're living in fear, because although it seems to be clearing and the army is present, they're thinking of what's coming next when the army leaves, what's going to happen, because Although, as I said, the situation seems pretty clear, but we must know that the Mujao and the Akimi are actually in hiding, so they're not showing themselves in fear of the French army. But I think that the dominance that is shown by the French army is not the same as that of the Malian army. And once the French have left the territories of Gao, it's going to be very easy, or a lot easier for them to gain again control. So I think we have to be very careful in how the French retreat and what they leave after them.
All right, and that's a point that we'll bring up when we show that excerpt from the report, Luke. Maybe we could call up the map. The idea of the drawdown was to quickly hand over to African and UN forces in most of the north and keep, perhaps for a while, a French presence in the Ifogas mountains that you see there, and perhaps in places like Gao and Kidal. Luke, when you were speaking with French forces, did they have a sense already that it was the beginning of the end, or did they feel as though, maybe we're in here for longer than we think?
Well, I think probably speaking off the record, some of the French soldiers there, they would say that any rapid withdrawal would be vastly over-optimistic because, quite simply, the situation is so difficult to control. You can control certain small areas such as cities, such as Kidal to a certain extent, more so Gao. But the areas around the cities, they're very, very large, and they're pretty empty, and there are quite a lot of places to hide for various different groups. And those different groups, they do have some sympathizers in small villages. There's a village just along from Gao called Kaji, which was full of, for the past 30 years, very extremist, if you will, fanatical Islamists, a small community. And that small community lent a hand throughout the occupation by the Mujao of Gao itself and of the wider region. So it's quite likely that some of those sympathizers, be they in Kaji, be they in other villages, well, they're going to be lending a hand for small groups of Islamist fighters or Islamist militants. So cracking down on those very small groups that are very spread around the country, that's going to be very, very difficult for the French forces.
It's difficult for the French forces, but will it be the French forces' job? Is the other question. Jean-Hugues KABUIKU, what's your prediction? Do you think the French can begin to draw down at the end of next month?
I think basically if they draw down by the end of the month, I think
beginning of the drawdown.
Beginning of the drawdown. I think basically the war is going to spread on the other country, and it's pretty easy to start a war, but it's pretty harder to finish it. And this is what we see in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now in Libya. We are giving military means to people we don't know anything about, and we're gonna have the blowback of it. And this is basically what is going to happen: a very harsh blowback on in Mali.
Michael Kirtley, do you think the French are going in there? The French in there right now are acting as firemen, or are they acting as, or are they fanning the flames?
I wouldn't say the French are fanning the flames. They've done a pretty good job in pushing back the jihadists and in sort of establishing a basis for moving forward. However, the real job that the French army was not even delegated to do, and it is not doing, is controlling how the Malian people actually act themselves in dealing with that. You've got all kinds of as we know, as we've discussed many times, you've got all kinds of factions within Mali that are against one another. And my concern is if the French pull out, what's going to happen? I mean, I've been predicting that there's going to be a bloodbath in that particular, between the Malian forces and even the Tuareg people there themselves. So,
and African forces and UN troops can't handle the situation?
As we've talked about before, I think the African forces are not that motivated to be there. They will do what they're told to do, but my feeling is that they're not capable at this particular point in time of having a command that's going to be so efficient in handling the different problems. That Mali is like, as I've said before, Humpty Dumpty. How are you going to put that back together? And the blowback that we just discussed is going to be big inside Mali itself. For me, there are two questions. The first one is, how will that affect the French? Will the French be affected politically, or once they pull out, will basically the world ignore what's going on in Mali until the jihadists start coming back if they do? And the second question is, is it important that we start thinking about what Mali really means? Because at this particular point, there's no hope to actually reintegrate the country of Mali except for President Hollande saying so.
For his part, the Chadian foreign minister, Chad, by the way, is the one country that's also sustained losses since the start of this conflict. They've had 27 killed. The Chadian foreign minister says the job is, quote, 70% complete. Moussa Faki insists that the intervention is still popular back in his country.
Chadian opinion, despite our losses, is that we know these men have not died for nothing. They died for a good cause, and this you are welcome to look into. They are especially proud of the work that's been done by the Chadian army.
Abdoulay MAIGA, what's your feeling on this? Can the French hand over and withdraw when you hear the Chadian foreign minister speaking there?
As it was said, I think there's a major problem with concerning the will of the African countries to send their men. Because yes, so we have seen that the Chadians are the largest army going into Mali. But besides Chad, there's a very hard time of the other countries to get men into Mali. And I think that the organization is going to be the biggest problem. It's not a problem having men or having the army at our disposal. It's how is all this going to be organized? What's the role that the Malian army is going to play in this? And are they even thinking of eventual ways of going out? And I think the main problem with not only Mali, with African nations in general, is this certain lack of fluidity and lack of control and this lack of organization, basically. And I think that the French, for the moment, are handling the situation with a lot of control. And once the French leave, it's going to be very chaotic because every country is going to be dealing with their own men. There's going to be no force leading the different men. And I think that's what's going to be the main problem in organizing these different armies, in sustaining the stability that was won by the French army.
But it is true that the French forces is probably about, in numbers, about equivalent to the number of African forces on the ground, not including the Malian forces. But because the African forces, perhaps they are under the MISMA umbrella, but there is a lack of coordination, as you say, not 100% lack of coordination, but they are functioning somewhat independently. So you can't really take that whole number of about 4,000 troops as necessarily being 4,000 operational troops. As we've seen, it's the Chadians that are bearing the brunt with the casualties that they've suffered. No other, there's been a couple of casualties dotted around, but it really is the Chadians. And it is worth noting as well, if the Chadians are now saying that it's 70% job done, when I was there 3 weeks ago, it was Jean-Hugues Le Drian, the French foreign minister, who said the French defense minister, who said exactly the same, 70% done 3 weeks ago. So the wires are getting crossed. The Chadians think they're behind schedule compared to what the French think. So there is not necessarily a lack of communication, but the coordination isn't all the way there yet.
Coordination isn't all the way there, you're saying. Abdoulay MAIGA, when you look at the situation in Mali today, there's talk of having elections, the elections that were stalled because of a coup that happened last March. Before they have a sit-down for what they're calling, I guess, a national conference where everyone would sit down. Are they proceeding in the right order? You're telling us that all the different armies have to get organized. The Malians themselves are wavering.
I think that communication is very important, and they do need to sit down and have a dialogue, and not forcefully negotiations, but have a real dialogue and speak about the situation. But I think we're not quite there yet because, as I said, we get the feeling that the situation is under control, but most of this is coming from the French army, French organization, and so the African armies are reacting and they're doing as they're told. But when the French retrieve as they plan to, it's going to become a lot more chaotic and a lot harder to handle.
And Luke Brown, did you sense a big disconnect between Bamako and Gao in terms of what's the order of priority?
Is physically is massive. When you're in Bamako, the war may as well be in a different country. I mean, there's a great deal of all the front pages are about the conflict, but the people not necessarily suffering. Everyone seems to know somebody who is either a displaced person or seeking refuge in the capital, but the conflict does still seem a very far away. I mean, it's a different situation between the north and the south, quite understandably, and that does translate, I think, as you say, about this election that's supposedly due in June or July. The hopes to get that organised by June or July seem excessively optimistic. I mean, they want to. There might be a certain priority to sort out the current situation before thinking about going into the vote.
And how could they even believe that there's going to be an election in June or July when there's really been no dialogue between the people of the north and the people of Bamako? There's been no coordination of the Malian army who are taking in militia on a continual basis that aren't even trained to be part of the army and who are supposed to somehow take over the management of some part of the control. How can there be any election if we have to integrate also the African forces into that whole dilemma, and the French forces are leaving? It seems not only unrealistic, it also seems vain to think that.
Jean-Hugues KABUIKU, what should the French be doing in that regard? Should they be putting pressure on the authorities in Bamako to sit down with all of the different ethnic groups within Mali, to have that national dialogue that Abdoulay was saying, or should they stay out of it? It's a domestic issue.
No, now we are here. We have to set up the rule of law. It's all about the rule of law. How are you going to...
So France owns this conflict.
Basically, we are left alone. The states don't want to go over there. We are still waiting for the African forces. So basically, we own this conflict. And we have to, first of all, how are you going to do prosperity and liberty in a country where there is no rule of law? You know, so basically, yes, they have to do a table ronde where all the ethnic group talk this through, and France have to do pressure about it, and it was the things of what France should have been done in the first place before saying, yeah, let's go to war and then think after. No, we should have done that before.
Do you agree, Abdoulay MAIGA?
Although I do agree that I think the French need to have a certain presence, but I think that this is a national dialogue and it should be had between the different ethnies and between the population in Mali. So this is a national conflict and it needs to be handled through discussion, but by the Malians. I don't think that the French should have a role of deciding. They should not have any decisional role in this. They should have mostly an organizational role and make sure that everyone is doing things in the right way, but not forcefully French taking the decisions, because that won't forcefully be in the interest of the different populations. They need to discuss between themselves, and so we need to.
It has to be between the
Malians
Malians
exactly.
themselves. We're going to come back in after a quick break. This is the France 24 debate.